Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for this video as we are going to break down the Indiana Pacers, take a look at an offseason preview, break down some potential signings, draft picks, and a whole lot more that pertains to Indiana this offseason. Very excited for this video. If you are new to the channel, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more, turn on that notification bell, and without further ado, let's jump into our video preview. With the 2022-2023 recap, we'll look back at this past season, what we learned a little bit more about this team, and some of the stuff we saw on the court this year. We'll look at the NBA draft lottery, the odds for Indiana to potentially move up in the draft. We'll look at the NBA draft prospects, NBA free agency situation for the Pacers as well. So guys that could fit in with them as potential free agent targets to go along with some of those potential NBA draft targets that we talked about earlier. And then we'll look at an early outlook for next season, which is pretty premature, but it goes to show how important this offseason potentially could be. And Pacers fans, I know how diehard you are for your Pacers. I see it all the time in the comment section. So let's get some of that Pacers hype down below. Let's try and maybe manifest some Victor Wembanyama luck, maybe some good lottery odds, and of course hopefully some good free agency signings. And you can start by manifesting that down in the comment section with maybe a little bit of a Pacers hype with a little prayer emoji or something. Get something in there like that. I'd love to see all of those comments. I read through every single one. So let's get into that recap from this past season. And I think you start with Tyrese Halliburton, all-star this past season, despite Wally Szczerbiak's hopes of him not being an all-star. That was a little fun mid-season beef that I was not expecting to hear about this year and see kind of play out. That was funny. But Halliburton, obviously with how well the Kings have played this year, that trade when at first was really initially, including by myself, reacted to not greatly for the Kings, but it's worked out very well for both sides. I think Halliburton is the franchise player for the Indiana Pacers, which anytime you can pull a franchise type guy out of a trade with another franchise, you have to feel pretty good about that. And especially since it didn't really cost them any draft assets. I mean, Tyrese Halliburton was very, very good this year. You look at his assist numbers specifically. And I think there's, some elements to that we're going to talk about a little bit later on in this season recap that I really want to highlight. But he's one of the best drive and kick guys in the NBA. Quite clearly watching him, he gets downhill with the intention of opening up the floor for his teammates. He puts a lot of pressure on the rim at his size. Now, I think he could be a little bit more forceful at the rim, but he's such a smart cerebral player that he doesn't necessarily need to. He makes the right pass very frequently. And also this year, one of the things I really enjoyed watching was kind of his 2K spin back type shot that I wasn't really expecting to ever consistently see on the NBA court. But Halliburton hit that shot quite a bit this year and had some really nasty highlights out of that. So very excited about Halliburton's future. Pacers fans, I'm sure you're more excited even than I am. But he's somebody I loved in his own draft class, and I'm glad to see him balling out in the NBA. Miles Turner, they got the extension done with him. A contract renegotiation maybe is what I should have on this graphic, because they were able to use their cap space this year, up the money on his deal to get a deal done. And I think the best part about that is they locked in a good center that they want to have a part of the team, and they did it at a number long term that makes sense. He's not making that much money going into next year, the year after. So the money long term for Indiana really makes sense. They used their cap space this year very wisely to help facilitate that extension. And it has worked out really well so far early on. Now, I know the Pacers didn't win a lot of games down the stretch of the year, this, that, and the other thing, but they kept one of their big important players going forward, and I think that it's a very smart, savvy move by the front office, and I think it was also very good for Miles Turner. So that relationship between the two sides, I think, is at a all-time high maybe, which is very, very good. Benedict Mathurin showed out in his rookie season. I know there's a lot of people on the internet saying, oh, his efficiency fell off, and some people are suggesting he shouldn't be second team, or he shouldn't be first team all rookie and should be second team all rookie. I mean, if you look at his scoring splits comparatively to a guy like Paulo Banchero, they're not far off. Now, Banchero, to me, still should be rookie of the year because he had to do it as the number one option, which is, I think, more difficult than what we saw Mathurin doing, which, by the way, if you go back to Halliburton, that's what makes his production and efficiency so impressive, is he is doing it as the number one guy, the guy with the ball in his hands all the time. But Mathurin, I think that we saw a lot of the skill set that I knew he was coming into the NBA with. If you go back to last year's draft videos, I talked very highly on Mathurin as a player who could be a finisher type, where he's going to look to score the basketball. And I think that the next step for him in his career is being able to kind of learn from Halliburton a little bit. He's never going to be Tyrese Halliburton, but understanding of, oh, if I get downhill, it's going to draw on the defense. Maybe I can look to kick. Funny, Halliburton was one of the most proficient drive and kick players in the league this year. Benedict Mathurin was one of the least proficient. So I think that if they take him and give him some of that progression steps over the offseason, where we can hopefully see him go into next year an improved passer and not just a finisher type, we're going to see this team take a pretty significant jump forward. Andrew Nembhard was a huge steal for them, one that, to be honest, on draft night, I just didn't really think he was going to impact this team as much as he did his rookie year. He was one of 2 players to average over 4 assists a game on the team. Both him and Halliburton, of course, are those 2 players. And Nembhard, I think, was a very good impact player for Indiana this year, and a player that really surprised a lot of people. I think he's also a pretty decent pesky defender that's going to stick around in this league for a while. So that's a home run pick for Indiana. Anytime you can find a guy in the second round that you feel confident about, and a guy that's going to stick around in the league, it's a well done job, honestly, on draft night. Then let's talk about Hield and Halliburton, one of the most prolific duos in the NBA. And I know, yeah, you think about duos, you think Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, you think about, maybe Joel Embiid, James Harden in Philadelphia, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown in Boston, and those duos are very prolific. But Buddy Hield and Halliburton are not far off, specifically with their connection together. Now, I know Hield is not as talented as a Jaylen Brown or a James Harden or anything like that, and I'm not trying to suggest he is, but these 2 guys connect so often, and so many of Buddy Hield's baskets are from Halliburton assists, whether that's an early transition, which is one of the best things that Hield provides to a team. He gets out and runs and gets ahead, and Halliburton does a good job looking up the court and finding him. So I just want to point out that duo. They do such a good job playing off of each other, specifically Hield off of Halliburton. And I think Hield's shot making is something that Pacers front office, Pacers management is going to value going long term. And if they're looking for other players to add into this team, someone like a Hield, someone who can step out, make a bunch of 3-point shots, and plays under the similar archetype, would be a nice addition for this team long term. And then when we're talking about Jordan Nwora, a player that they picked up at the trade deadline in a, kind of reshuffling of the cards for Milwaukee. Nwora came in, and I actually said on my trade deadline live stream, I'm sure a lot of you were actually there, that I low-key liked that move for Indiana, a player who he's always been able to shoot the basketball, and I think we really saw that this past year for Indiana. Once he got with the Pacers organization, he shot above 40% from 3. I think he's another player that could maybe grow into a Buddy Hield-esque role. Now, he's not going to have the career that Buddy Hield has had, in my opinion, but I think he's going to be a nice shooting option, someone who's going to be a consistent floor spacer, and he's going to help this team out in significant ways, significant manners, as a floor spacer, gravity shooter. And he's a very, very consistent shooter, whether that's off pin downs, obviously in early transition like we saw with Hield. I think Nwora gives you some of that as well. Plus, he's flashed at certain points in his career the ability to do more. So I'm hoping that he takes a step forward, but I think he might be a nice little piece that this team could look to build with going forward. Then we go into our NBA draft lottery odds, and you see where Indiana's at. They're actually tied with Washington, which gives them a 6.7% chance at the first overall pick. And as you can see on the graphic, Victor Wembanyama does look pretty good in some of those Indiana Pacers colors, doesn't he? On top of that 6.7% chance to pick 1, they have a 7% chance at number 2. If you want to go check out my most recent mock draft on the channel after this video, I would really recommend it. Indiana does move up in the lottery in that one, which presents a very interesting discussion for the Pacers. And then 7.5% chance roughly at pick 3, and a little bit under 8% chance for pick 4. You add all of those numbers up and you have a pretty decent likelihood of moving up in this year's draft. And I think if you're a Pacers fan, that's really one of the things you're begging for, specifically for that guy on the left of the graphic. He is a franchise-changing player and would really go a long way in helping Indiana reach the postseason as early as next year. But who are some other NBA draft prospects that could make sense around picks 7 or 8, depending on where they ultimately land in the draft? And I think, forward Taylor Hendricks is really the starting point for me. Out of UCF, a player that I really like. I think that he provides a lot of the things missing from Indiana. I think Indiana is a little small at the power forward position. Now, I know they have Jalen Smith, but I mean, I'm looking for guys who are athletic, lengthy, shot blockers who can move out in space with a lot of mobility and an offensive skill set to boot with. And there's not a lot of guys in the league that really fit that criteria. I think Taylor Hendricks and Jarace Walker would be two guys that do provide those things. Hendricks is a better shot blocker at the rim than Jarace Walker. I think Walker's a little bit more versatile defensively, a little bit more mobile and fluid out on the perimeter on that end of the floor. But Hendricks would be my preference for this team because I think that shot blocking element next to Miles Turner could really create a dynamic duo in a way at the rim defensively. Miles Turner, of course, has blocked so many shots already in his career. I think Taylor Hendricks could give them something similar to that without really compromising any of their offensive spacing. He shot over 39% from 3 this past year at the collegiate level. So a player who I think is going to have a nice long career in the NBA. He's got a phenomenal physical frame. He's highly athletic, and he's really gutsy and willing to stick in there and risk being put on a poster. And oftentimes he comes up on the better end of things anyway with a huge block that really shifts momentum. And I think it would give Indiana a lot more opportunities to run in transition. We talked about Jarace Walker already a little bit. I don't think he'll be on the board at pick 7 or 8, but if he was, he'd be a nice pickup for this team. Ausar Thompson from Overtime Elite, probably another example of a player who probably isn't on the board at this spot, but I do think he has an intriguing skill set, very shifty, dynamic with the ball in his hands, improving as a shot maker. I think he's getting a little overrated in that realm, especially compared to his twin brother. And I don't think Ausar is blowing him out of the water. I do think he's a little bit better, but I see comments saying that Ausar is significantly better shooter. I don't think that's true. I think he's a mildly better shooter, and who knows how their careers play out. Maybe Ausar grows into becoming a much better shooter, but as of right now, I don't think that it's as prolific of a difference as people are suggesting. Forward Cam Whitmore, a player that I think is actually a pretty decent fit onto this roster. I know some people say, well, we don't want a second Mathurin. And Cam Whitmore, yes, he has some of the similar tendencies as he's going to attack downhill looking to score. He's not much of a playmaker out of that. So I understand from a driving perspective that, he is sometimes out of control and sometimes he's not going to make the right read and make the right pass. And you do already have some of that in Mathurin. But Whitmore is bigger than Mathurin. He's more physical than Mathurin. I think he's more vertically explosive than Mathurin. And Mathurin was a prospect I really liked last year. I think Cam Whitmore has some significant positives to him. I think he's also got more defensive upside than Mathurin, who I don't think is a bad defender. I just think Cam Whitmore has more upside there on that end of the floor. So I still think with Indiana's roster construction, the more big talented wings you have, the better. And I think Whitmore could really fall into that criteria. And then Anthony Black from Arkansas, another guard I would consider, just given the fact that, you think about what he is as a prospect with his ability to handle the ball, get a team set. He becomes the off-ball guard next to Halliburton, and they're both 6'6", 6'7"-ish. Black a little bit lengthier than Halliburton, but not as skilled of a shooter, but I think has some of the similar traits that make Halliburton very good. I think Anthony Black's going to have a fantastic career, a little bit more defensive-minded than Halliburton as well, but still somebody I would really strongly consider picking if I was a GM in the top 10, which leads us into some of their other draft picks. They have that Cleveland first from the Karis LeVert trade, the Boston first from the Malcolm Brogdon trade. So those are picks 26 and 29. Plus, they have multiple second-round picks here as well. So instead of going through like 5-6 prospects for each of these picks, because it would, take probably 20 minutes of the video, I've just narrowed down to some guys I think that they should consider with some of these picks. Not necessarily as exhaustive of a list, but I would say go check out some of my mock drafts. It breaks down really good fits for Indiana, towards the back end of the first round specifically. And a lot of these guys could be players that fit pretty well. So starting off, forward Jordan Walsh, who actually made an announcement on Twitter today. Wasn't really a good announcement because no one actually knows what he meant. But he basically saying that an announcement's coming soon, more than anything. So we'll see if he's actually declaring for the draft or not. But I think he's got the point of attack defensive capabilities that Indiana is lacking on the wing. And I think he's likely a second round pick, could fit in really well. Guard Terquavion Smith, I don't necessarily love him for Indiana. I don't think there's a huge need for that, just given the fact that they do have Nembhard. But he's still somebody who is talented as a shot maker. And I think for Indiana, you should consider everything. And at the end of the day, the draft is about talent acquisition. A lot of the time, if you believe Terquavion Smith's better than the other options on the board, you just don't rule him out based on what your current roster looks like, in my opinion. Amari Bailey is a player I think Rick Carlisle would really like. He's a physical guard who can really get up and down the court. He's very left-handed, so he doesn't finish at the rim very well with his right hand, which is a typical rookie problem anyway. Most rookies do not finish well at the rim to begin with. I think Amari Bailey would have significant issues his first year finishing at the rim with his right hand. I think he'd do an okay job with his left. The shooting's a little inconsistent with him, which is what bumps him down to the bottom of the first round. And again, he's a guard, so I don't think Indiana really strongly considers him, but I wouldn't rule it out either because he does have some defensive capabilities. He just finds a way to get his hand on the basketball, and that goes a long way in helping your team make timely plays when it matters most. Derek Lively is an interesting trade-up candidate for this team. I don't think he'd be there all the way down at 26. Now, I know some people believe he will be. I would just be pretty surprised if a 7'1" prospect with great physical traits and shot blocking capabilities would fall that far. Now, you look at what Walker Kessler, what happened to him last year. He fell extremely far, and I said that was a mistake. I thought Walker Kessler was a much better prospect than where he ended up going in the draft, and I think I've been vindicated in that with his performance as a rookie. Not that Derek Lively is the same prospect as Walker Kessler, he's not, but big, lengthy centers who know how to block shots around the rim and be tough guys to finish around typically go on to have pretty decent careers. I think Lively's smart. He's got the foot speed and lateral mobility to be somewhat switchable out on the perimeter. It's not like you're going to want him matched up on ones and twos like what we see in Miami from Bam Adebayo, but I think he can survive in those spaces every once in a while. Trace Jackson Davis at 6'9", lesser sized player, but I'm sure he's a fan favorite for Pacers fans. Obviously, as a Hoosier, I think Trace Jackson Davis is going to have a very, very good NBA career. I think he'd be a perfect fit next to Tyrese Halliburton as a rim rolling center. He's not going to play the same style as a post up big at the NBA level unless you're using him as a post split passer or maybe a high split passer. But I think that there is a lot of ways to use him in roles that we have seen underexplored, I think, at Indiana. I think he's going to have a really nice NBA career. Like I said, I think he's a very athletic big who can block shots. And I think he's a timely playmaker on both ends of the floor, and that's something you can always look to add to a team. Indiana, I know that they have their, center situation kind of filled out a little bit with Miles Turner. I know Isaiah Jackson pretty up and down this past year, but I think TJD would definitely help fill out and flesh out that room quite a bit. Forwards now, Dylan Mitchell, Leonard Miller, two guys who are highly athletic. Leonard Miller took a big step this year for G League Ignite. Dylan Mitchell very likely does not actually stay in the NBA draft this year. He's a prospect that I would draft near the back end of the first round or towards the top of the second round if I was a GM, but I understand some of the concerns on him. And then forward Jett Howard, he's got a lightning quick handle. He's not as quick himself, but his handle is very tight and sharp, and I think he can get to his spot on the court very frequently. Out of Michigan, we'll see where he goes on draft night. I think he'll hover around that 26 spot that Indiana owns for draft night, but I wouldn't be surprised if he goes a couple of picks before that either. So I think Indiana could be a trade-up team using those two back first-rounders to move up. They could also look to move those picks back into future years, which I would also recommend, just trying to set this franchise up long-term for continued success. And we get into NBA free agency this summer, and their practical cap space is upwards of $38.5 million. Plus, they have the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, which, as was reported, roughly around $12.5 million now. So that number has jumped up over $1 million, which means it's very likely you could land a pretty good player with that on a 3-year, $37-ish million deal. I think that's going to be highly intriguing to a lot of good veteran players. And Indiana could, with the money that they have this offseason, look to add a max slot guy or a couple role players plus a mid-level exception. Realistically, you could add up to as many 3 or 4 just solid good players to your team, which I think is a really good way to look at it. And if you think about Indiana, yes, they have to factor in that pretty soon here they're going to have to give Haliburton an extension. And with the money that Miles Turner's making, this is why it's important that they got him on a cheap deal in terms of the next future years, because it gives them this flexibility going into this offseason to continue to add good players to this team, improve around Haliburton before his max extension will ultimately kick in at some point. So some potential free agent targets, high price guys would be like Draymond Green, maybe Jerami Grant from the Blazers. Those are 2 options I really just do not like that much for the Pacers. I just don't think either of them really move the needle. Draymond Green, I think, is a great player, one of the better players, one of the more underrated players around the league, but I just don't think he's the right guy for this team. And because of that, I would just pass on it if I was Indiana, and I'm not sure if Draymond Green's going to have interest to go play for the Pacers either, to be honest. And then Jerami Grant, he's going to stay with the Blazers, and to be honest, I don't think he impacts winning as much as everyone likes to imagine he does. I know he has had seasons where he puts up 20 points a game. He's going to get paid big time this offseason, and for me, I'm just not getting involved in that. And this middle column here, the mid-level exception price, is really the price point that I think the Pacers would do really well focusing in on this offseason with that, $38-ish million plus a mid-level exception itself. You could realistically land all 4 of the guys here in that middle section if you prioritized it in free agency. A Joe Ingles from Milwaukee and Jae Crowder from Milwaukee would be 2 really savvy, good veterans that could help this Pacers team take a significant step forward. Jae Crowder, funny enough, started his career in Dallas with Rick Carlisle, was promptly traded in the Rajon Rondo trade, but I still think would make a lot of sense for what this Pacers current team needs are. A physical wing defender with playoff experience, I think, would help this team maybe take that next step forward. Joe Ingles gives you another playmaker off of Nembhard and off of Haliburton, which is something I still think that this team needs as well. Georges Niang's been a pretty reliable 3-point shooter throughout his career. Of course, you don't get the name Bang Bang Niang by being a bad one. So I definitely think he's a player that if you're looking for more shooting, which the Pacers have done a pretty good job having shooting on their roster and surrounding Haliburton with shooting, I think if you ever want more of it, Georges Niang's a good option. And then we're looking at another physical type player, Bruce Brown, very smart defender. Now he's not a 35-minute a game type of guy. I think he's more of a 22 to 25-minute per game player. But if you go out and give him a full non-taxpayer mid-level exception, I'm pretty confident you would land him in free agency. Same with Ingles and Crowder, honestly, at the point of their careers that they're at. These contracts might not age perfectly, but with the way that the CBA is about to change and the fact that, hey, we're about to give Haliburton an extension here, you don't really have a lot of room to go out and make some big signings, and locking some guys in under the salary cap floor that you guys are currently at could be a really smart maneuver for this Pacers team, for Kevin Pritchard, and for Rick Carlisle to consider. So I think Ingles, Crowder, Niang, Brown, if you get 2 or 3 of those guys, you'd have significant improvement. JaMychal Green for the Warriors, I don't love it, but I think it would be an option, just kind of looking at what they've looked to add at the 4-man spot. I know, Pacers fans like Jalen Smith, but and JaMychal Green wouldn't be stealing those minutes. He'd just be more of a veteran on the roster. Dwight Powell, he might steal minutes because Rick Carlisle loves this guy. And I hope the Mavericks don't have him next year because I'm tired of watching him be the starting center. I do think he could be an okay off the bench big at the NBA level. Now, for the Pacers specifically, he would fit perfectly into what Carlisle wants to do. We've seen Dwight Powell be productive in the past for him, and they have a good relationship. So I wouldn't rule something out like Dwight Powell, who is headed toward free agency now this summer. But I really think that middle section, the middle column, mid-level exception price is really the important one. Guys like Ingles, Crowder, Niang, Brown would be much better additions than, having to go out and spend a lot for one guy or spending on minimum players that just don't really move the needle that much. I really prefer that middle column. So the early outlook for next season, when we think about Indiana, the team that the Pacers are, I think there's a lot of room for growth. This team took a massive step forward this year. They played much, much better. I think, having the continuity of Haliburton in the lineup all season long. I think the infusion of youth with Nembhard, Mathurin definitely helped as well. Plus, Rick Carlisle being able to set down his roots a little bit more, kind of build up a little bit more continuity and consistency with this roster, I think it's always been good. I think Rick Carlisle's a good coach. I think that they have the assets, the pieces to improve this team. They have the cap space to get better. And who knows, with how the lottery plays out, they could set themselves up for some real serious success as early as next season, depending on where they move up to in the lottery. You know, a guy like Brandon Miller could really help this team as well, even if they moved up to 3 or 4. There's a lot of good prospects in this year's draft that I think could really help out Indiana in a variety of ways. So I'm excited for this team. If you're a Pacers fan, you should be excited as well. Halliburton, again, I think was a home run trade for them. I know that wasn't this past season, but I just want to, continue to hype that move up, because that was such a franchise altering and path defining trade. And I feel like it was one that really has worked out well for Indiana so far, and has really given this team a clear direction, which is something I think they lacked in the years right before acquiring Halliburton. So I'm very happy with where Indiana is. A rebuild sometimes not the best thing for fans, not the easiest thing to stomach, but it seems like Pacers fans for the most part have bought into it, which I think is really good, because it also seems like the front office and ownership for once is finally understanding, like, hey, this is a way for us to competitively reshift and reconfigure our team. And I think it's been really good for this organization, and I'm very happy with the direction that they're heading in. Thank you all so much for watching. I really do hope you enjoyed the video. Just a reminder to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more, turn on that notification bell so you don't miss out on any other content. And speaking of other content, go check out that NBA mock draft like I told you about earlier on in the video. Pacers move up in the lottery in that one, so it'd be a lot of fun. I hope you guys did enjoy this video. If you did, again, smash that like button. Let me know in the comment section your thoughts on the Indiana Pacers and this offseason, and I'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.